Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu offered this statement yesterday amid calls from many representatives of in the UN, representatives of countries that compose the UN, in the wake of the intemperate comments from mainly, perhaps entirely, Democrat Socialist members of Congress, people like Cori Bush from St. Louis, a card-carrying member of the Socialist Spice Girls, who called the Israeli response to the terrorist attack ethnic cleansing. Here's what Benjamin Netanyahu had to say.
I want to make clear Israel's position regarding a ceasefire. Just as the United States would not agree to a ceasefire after the bombing of Pearl Harbor or after the terrorist attack of 9/11, Israel will not agree to a cessation of hostilities with Hamas after the horrific attacks of October 7th. Calls for a ceasefire are calls for Israel to surrender to Hamas, to surrender to terrorism, to surrender to barbarism. That will not happen. Ladies and gentlemen, the Bible says that there is a time for peace and a time for war. This is a time for war, a war for our common future. Today we draw a line between the forces of civilization and the forces of barbarism. It is a time for everyone to decide where they stand against the forces of barbarism until victory. I hope and pray that civilized nations everywhere will back this fight. Because Israel's fight is your fight. Because if Hamas and Iran's axis of evil win, you will be their next target. That's why Israel's victory will be your victory. But make no mistake, regardless of who stands with Israel, Israel will fight until this battle is won.
It's a couple of salient points that he makes, and Wall Street Journal opined on this too, pretty good editorial, that the response you're seeing from the West in so many quarters, not completely, but in too many quarters, and many other countries around the world, particularly those with majority Muslim populations, exactly points to the need for Israel. Wall Street Journal editorial board writing in their piece, before there was Chancellor Hitler in 1933, there were roving bands of brown shirts inflicting political and anti-Semitic violence on the streets of Germany. They too often went unchecked by police, prosecutors, and politicians who didn't understand the menace, sympathized with the offenders, or merely felt overwhelmed by the scale of the danger. Hitler gained power in part because the German state no longer could maintain its monopoly on violence in defense of small d democratic values. Today's threats to democracy are different, but one lesson is the same and is crystal clear. A Western society that can't or won't muster the will to defend its Jewish neighbors and fellow citizens won't be able to defend itself. And that was the point that Netanyahu was making when he said this fight is your fight as well in the West, and really the world over, but the specific appeal is to the West, no doubt. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Liel Leibovitz. He is the editor-at-large for Tablet, tabletorg.com. Liel, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
What a pleasure.
The comments of Netanyahu against the backdrop of what you're seeing, what we're all seeing on college campuses from elites largely on the left, but perhaps not exclusively, although I can't think of somebody on the right who is saying the kinds of things that Cori Bush or Pramil Jayapal or AOC or Rashida Tlaib are saying. But those comments and against the backdrop of the overall response from the West.
Yeah, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu has got it exactly right. You know, it's easy to look at this and mistake it for some, fight happening somewhere else in some corner of the world that has nothing to do with us, just Israel versus Hamas. It is truly a fight between the so-called axis of resistance, Iran, but actively featuring Russia and China, against all who are civilized. Now, it used to be that fighting conflicts such as this was relatively simple. You knew who the good guys were, you knew who the bad guys were. The thing that makes this particular conflict so really charged and complex is that you now have 7,000 people in my hometown, New York City alone, marching in support of a terrorist organization currently holding dozens of American citizens hostage. What you do with that is way more complicated and calls for action at home as well as abroad.
But what can we do? I mean, I know that they claim 29 or 30 Americans were killed in Israel. Why don't we know their stories? Why aren't their stories coming out?
Well, I'm sorry to be, so jaundiced so early in the morning, but I think it's because so many people who ought to know better, people in classrooms and newsrooms in America's most elite institutions, simply don't care. They would much rather cheer for the terrorists beheading babies because they're, quote unquote, some kind of oppressed minority than stop to think what actually happened to that American grandmother, what actually happened to that young person from New York maybe being held captive in some tunnel in Gaza. That is a sign of absolute, moral depravity.
And then you have the AP. I don't know if you saw their headline after that bloodthirsty mob went into the airport to try to look for Jewish people to kill them. They're checking passports. The AP originally, their headline was it was an anti-Israeli protest. It labeled it as a protest instead of, and this is the AP.
Mostly peaceful.
Yeah,
mostly peaceful, right?
While they're tearing down, going through windows and busting in doors.
So, first of all, now I'm forced to cancel my plans for Christmas vacation in Dagestan. But on a serious note, sometimes you play these word games and you think it's so silly. Who cares if they call them protesters or terrorists, et cetera? But I think it's really, what you just said really explains the crux of the issue. If you look at a mob of bloodthirsty savages surrounding a plane and saying, we demand that all Jews be surrendered to us, and you can't bring yourself to say, this is absolutely reprehensible, these people are terrorists, there's something profoundly wrong with you and with your organization and with whatever culture made this possible.
I mean, we're being reminded, for those who've been paying attention, about what's happened to so many college campuses in America, particularly those that enjoy the most status among Americans, ironically. We're also seeing how, pointless the international institutions like the UN are, with the comments from Secretary General Guterres, as well as the resolutions, the competing resolutions, so much so that the protestation from the Israeli delegation to wear the yellow stars, did you think that was that pointed rebuke symbolically was warranted?
Yes and no. Yes, because I totally understand the sentiment. No, because frankly, I don't understand what Israel is still doing, or anyone for that matter is still doing, being a member of the United Nations, right, just as much as I don't understand why anyone would send their kids to college. Look, I have a PhD from Columbia University. I taught at Columbia for several years. I taught at NYU for almost a decade. And then when I realized what was going on, I not only left, but wrote an article 6 years ago now saying, it is time for everyone who loves America, definitely every American Jew, to get out of these institutions. I tell my 10-year-old and my 12-year-old 3 times a week, you're never going to college, because I don't want to spend $250,000 in 4 years of your time just so someone could turn you into a Nazi.
And so you couldn't have been surprised to see the letter from those 100 Columbia University professors backing the students and others who were essentially backing Hamas.
I was surprised it was only 100.
Yeah, really? Exactly. The second stage strategy of Hamas here, just in terms of the providing some definition to the description of Hamas as a death cult, they want Israelis to kill to kill residents of Gaza. They want Israelis to kill Palestinians so they can use them for propaganda purposes, right?
It's even more nefarious than that. It's not just some, cold calculus, well, we'll kill them, we'll win propaganda points. Hamas actually genuinely believes that every Palestinian who dies in this struggle is a martyr who goes straight to heaven, and therefore is benefiting in some weird way. And so they're relishing doing this. Their headquarters is right under the main hospital in Gaza. That's a very strategic choice, meaning that if you ever try to strike against these murderers, you would be forced to do it in the vicinity of a hospital. It is so deprived and so evil, and it shows you precisely who these people are.
What is your handle on the preparation for the incursion into Gaza? And we've talked a lot about that over the last week, just how complicated and dangerous that sort of urban warfare is going to be. And obviously the Israelis' commitment is pretty clear, but how do you expect that to proceed? What are the things that concern you most about that?
I'll be very honest. You're completely correct. This is a very, very difficult and intricate operation, and it does wield some good results. Yesterday, we've seen the successful release of the first hostage. IDF had a great operation and released a 19-year-old young woman. But you asked what concerns me, and I'll be very honest. What concerns me is how we got here. And if we're being very candid, how we got here is 8 years of Barack Obama's foreign policy, followed by 4 years of Joe Biden's similar policy, sometimes known as the Iran deal, a policy that rather than strike Iran, isolate it, and starve it until these murderous mullahs go away, continues to bring it back to the fore, support it materially by tens of billions of dollars, and integrate it, the administration's word, not mine, into the region. That's a disaster. That's a real threat, not only to the state of Israel, but also, I firmly believe, to vital American national interest, because we are currently strengthening our most fierce enemy in the world.
What do you think of President Biden's job so far in reference to Israel?
I'll be honest. I'm pleasantly surprised. I am deeply touched by both the president's visit and the president's unwavering support. I think that he truly and passionately wants to stand with Israel. However, I would be much more relieved if, as part of this awakening of having witnessed these unspeakable acts of barbarism, the president would also announce the reversal of this foreign policy towards Iran and say that we're returning to sanctions, we're returning to a coalition of international pressure against this genocidal regime, and we're returning to claim our part in this, what is very clearly a bubbling global conflict.
Well, sure. I mean, the disgusting irony of standing with Israel now and against Hamas and Hamas's financiers like the mullahs in Tehran, but at the same time, I mean, America is basically funding both sides, both directly and through our energy policy, and so we need to pick one, it would seem.
I would say something more. I would say that we need to pick none. I wrote a piece in July calling on America to end military support to Israel right away. Military support to Israel is really just a form of backdoor subsidy to American defense contractors. Israel doesn't need it. Israel actually loses more than $1 billion every year simply because it is forced to buy American products rather than develop its own weaponry and weapon systems. What I want to see, what I believe so many of your listeners also want to see, is a reality in which no American lives are ever threatened by no American lives are ever threatened by these conflicts abroad. I want to see a reality in which Israel is free and unfettered to defend its own interests. I want to see a reality in which America understands who its real enemies are and stands fierce to Iran. What is really important to understand right now is that the Iran deal, this policy of integrating Iran into the region, isn't a form of so-called not playing in the region. It is actually something much more nefarious. By supporting Iran, we're basically picking sides. I say, stop supporting Iran, put the sanctions back on, stop the military aid to Israel, and let Israel defend itself in a way that also furthers and serves American interests. That is a win-win solution for everyone.
That's compelling. There's a former CIA officer who was on the Iran desk who argues in an op-ed that Tehran cannot sit back and watch Israel crush Hamas, and absent deterrence, like you're describing, the Iranians will open a second front. What's your concern about this becoming a powder keg and extending beyond the region?
I mean, becoming is a gentle word. It already has. This morning we were informed that the Houthis, the Iranian allies in Yemen, have already started firing towards Israeli target as well. You have Hezbollah, the Iranian proxy, up in Lebanon. You have Iranian drones fighting with the Russians to kill Ukrainians outside of Kiev. This is already a global conflict. The only question here is, how are we going to fight it, and when are we going to fight it? We could do it right now on terms that are beneficial to us, mainly by letting Israel do what it needs to do to crush this enemy, or we could do it later on terms that are beneficial to our enemy, and most likely here at home, because these people aren't going to stop. They're going to bring this war to us, to our cities, to our communities. And I, for one, would desperately want that to not be the case.
You wrote this piece in City Journal called American Banlieue, which we talked about a bit last week. It was very interesting. It was sort of a message to suburbanites in the West, particularly America. Give us your distillation of that, talking about what you've seen, what you were describing in Western Europe, and the potential contagion for suburban America.
But look, last couple of weeks, I'll be very honest here, really shocked me. I'm an immigrant to this great country myself. I was born in Israel, and it was obvious to me from a certain age that I would like to have the privilege of making my life in this great country, which I love and respect dearly. To see hordes of people in the streets of Brooklyn, in communities that have traditionally been made up of generations and generations and generations of immigrants from all over the world, all of a sudden behaving like those rioters that you see in the poor suburbs of Paris, and burning up the block, quite literally setting fires in the middle of the street in support of Hamas, in hatred of Jews and defiance of America. That to me was a really new phenomenon and a very troubling one. There are many reasons to how we got here, but the most important question is what do we do moving forward? I have a bunch of thoughts that I share in the piece. They include, for example, taking very, very seriously federal funding to universities that allow this kind of incitement to happen. That absolutely has to stop. We can no longer continue and support with our taxpayer dollars that kind of anti-American, anti-Semitic propaganda. But whatever we do, I think that ought to be a great big wake-up call that we need to start taking this threat seriously. It's a domestic threat.
And maybe cutting off some of the funding from places like Qatar to American universities while we're at it.
100%.
Well, who's funding all these protests? I mean, they just, there has to be an organizer. There has to be some kind of cash.
Yes, indeed there is. Sadly, the answer is complicated. Some of the money comes as through a lot of these university structures from the Qataris, but sadly, look, a lot of the money for these supposed peaceful non-government organizations is coming from organizations like the Open Society, run and paid for by George Soros, one of the greatest blights on Western civilization in the last 30, 40 years. We're talking about very, very large infusions of cash to hire and train these operatives. We have seen it wreak havoc in American cities because their other project is, training and getting DAs elected to do things like eliminate bail. And you guys in Chicago know better than anyone what that looks like. And we're seeing it here too. And that is also something that I think we need to address very seriously.
Liel Leibovitz is the editor-at-large for Tablet, tabletorg.com. Liel, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.
Did you know most vitamin supplements have a warning label on the back? That's because without the synergy of thousands of nutrients working together that are found naturally in whole fruits and vegetables, vitamins are not balanced. This is why Balance of Nature only uses whole fruits and vegetables, no isolates or synthetic vitamins of any kind. We take a variety of 31 of the highest quality fruits and vegetables and remove the water without changing the rich chemistry. It's then ground to a powder, blended to perfection, and encapsulated, preserving the nutrients and making it easy to get the fruits and vegetables you need. So even though Balance of Nature comes in a capsule and looks like a vitamin, it's very different. Start your journey to better health with Balance of Nature. Go to balanceofnature.com to get 35% off your first preferred order and get this special offer by using discount code CHICAGO.
You're smart, you waited. Now is the best time to buy from Wilkins Mazda in Elmhurst. If you're looking for a new or pre-owned Mazda, you'll need to visit Wilkins Mazda in Elmhurst. You'll find the Mazda you want, and the price you see is the price you get. No games, no gimmicks. And right now is a great time to buy a new Mazda with limited time incentives that only come around once a year. Right now, get 0.9% financing on new select 2024 Mazda CX-5s and new 2024 Mazda CX-90s for 36 months. Or get 2.9% financing on new 2023 Mazda CX-30s. With approved credit through Mazda Financial Services.